don't get cancelled.
What a thing to get cancelled over. God, people need a life. That's the intro. Hello and welcome to The Big Con, the podcast dedicated to demystifying and simplifying the world of strategy, exploring its impact on businesses and individuals who've either harnessed it for success or perhaps missed the mark. I'm Emily, Harvard degree candidate.
And I am Dale Lazinski, and I am still a big business nerd and self-proclaimed content aficionado.
And we are bringing you in on the con, sharing the valuable lessons from the failures and the triumphs of those who've come before us. So Dale, you're talking to me today.
And listeners, welcome back. It is season 4, which means nothing to you, but everything to us. It just means that we had an extended break because we did a lot of conning. We are back, renewed with energy, kind of. And the reason I have energy is because I am talking about a business today that I am really chuffed about because I'm a nerd. So today's business that we're putting under the Big Con microscope contributes to one of America's biggest exports, has roughly 72,000 pieces of intellectual property to its name. It filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in 1996 and has had 8 different owners, and now finds its home with one of the world's most prominent media and entertainment companies. Emily, who do you think I am talking about?
Oh, I don't know, actually.
Marvel Comics.
Oh, yes. Oh my gosh, I did the back-to-back release order Marvel thing in lockdown. And when I got to Endgame, I was like, things haven't been the same since Endgame Marvel, by the way. But
And we will get into that. So on today's episode, we're looking at Marvel. It's the home of Iron Man, the home of Spider-Man, Black Panther, the Avengers, and X-Men. At its core, Marvel is a story-making factory, which is a bloody fantastic business to be in. Marvel has had so many iterations as a business, ones formed by the environment around it, and all those who have owned it with the mission to get characters and their stories to the audience and a bit more awareness with the medium. The Marvel story is home to a multiverse of strategic lessons that can be taken from a company that's dealt with so many storms. So let's start where we often do on the Big Con podcast, at the start. Timely Publications. Founded by Martin Goodman in 1939. Ye olde times. Its swanky new offices in 330 West, 42 2nd Street, New York City. Martin was the editor, the business manager, and all the rest. He had a decent amount of experience in pulp magazines, which at the time were like small paperback books, and men's adventure magazines, which I just love as a genre. Comic books, as we know them now, they're not mainstream medium. People don't really care about them too much until Superman debuts. For those who don't know, it's owned by DC. It's effectively the first superhero comic book as we know it. It's called Action Comics #1. And in 1939, Marvel does the same thing. They debut their own comic book, Marvel Comics #1. For those interested, it featured the Human Torch, who at this point in the Marvel arc is an android for some reason, and a character called the Submariner, who would many, many years later appear as a villain in the Marvel Cinematic Universe movie Black Panther 2. Records show that it was a decent success as far as comics go, with just under 1 million copies sold in over a month. And what does any good business do with success, Emily? You grow. So one of the first staff members they bring online at the soon-to-be Marvel Comics, remember it's still called Timely Publications at this point, was a 16-year-old Stanley Lieber, a name that may seem familiar. A cousin of Goodman's wife. They brought on an actual editor at the time and a talented artist, Jack Kirby, and in 1949, they dreamed up Captain America. Stanley Lieber was wearing a variety of hats at Marvel Comics, including contributing to the stories and the characters, and by 1941, he kicked out that other editor and he had landed the job as interim editor himself of the comics, and he adopted the pseudonym Stan Lee. I imagine that name is now resonating with a lot of people. He's pretty much doing a lot he's very passionate about the stories. But the thing with Marvel is they're very light on staffing. And it's something that they will stay with the Marvel brand for a long time. There's stories of them counting paperclips around the office. So they're not big on spending money, which is good. Because the broader public had a lot less interest in superheroes, particularly after the war. And in this period, Goodman, who's still in charge and at the helm, he's like, Stan, I need you to go out there and follow the trends. If you're making stories and books, I want you to go see what's popular out there. So they're pushing out Western comics or like horror comics and even kaiju comics.
I've heard things that are going on in the world, things like the war and big things that are impacting society. It really impacts what people consume.
Correct.
Apparently, Batman makes a comeback every time we need like hope and need to feel ability to deal with our own issues in like a societal situation. So vigilantes become really popular. Very interesting.
We're going off script here, but if you compare back to Batman, The Dark Knight was a very, very popular movie right at the start of the Obama administration, and where that need for Obama was very much in some spaces seen as a different approach to leadership in the American government, and was seen as this new hope and this way of changing the narrative. So yeah, you're right. Things in media, it's very much dictated by what's needed. And at the time of the 1950s, kaijus were a big thing, like drive-in movies where there's like giant praying mantis movies and things like that.
Yeah.
And so people wanted to watch those in the drive-ins, but they also want to watch them, the Blob, and they want to watch them in comic books, apparently. And the company floundered in the 1950s. Sure, they're producing stuff, but they were minimal, and there's no real like breakout hits. Interestingly enough, there was not a superhero, as we know it now, in sight. December 1998 interview speaks to their survival, mainly from the ability of timely publications on Marvel, their ability to produce content quickly and really cheaply. Now, let's talk quickly about DC Comics, which in 1960 gave their characters a bit of a revitalization. The Flash, Batman, and more, they're getting exciting new stories, and DC is seemingly untouchable in the comic book land. And then DC does something. They're like, well, if they like seeing these characters in one standalone comic, imagine if we brought them together. And so they launch a thing called Justice League. It's a straightforward concept. They bring them all together and they see them team up and fight a big enemy. Imagine if Wonder Woman, the Flash, and Superman and Batman all teamed up.
I don't know why that's so exciting. Like, even just like hearing about it, like, it's so exciting when they all come together. Remember like crossover eps in the 90s?
Correct.
Where you'd see like one of your favorite characters in a different show. It was the most exciting thing. I literally have no idea why, but it's just so fun.
We can talk about this. My theory is it's because it's like you know a character in their current environment and you're just excited to see them in another environment, how they would do. And so the mind starts, oh, well, how do they react in this situation?
Yeah, new possibilities. It's so cool. What fun. Bring back crossover eps.
Funny you should mention that. Because Goodman, he's still in that kind of trend following mantra. And so he's like, Stan, we need a Justice League. And at this time, Stan is the only full-time member of Marvel Comics. So he comes up with a response. The Fantastic Four. Now, these were different, though. They're not your standard comic book heroes. These are whingy, flawed, financial insecurity superheroes. And just like that, Marvel had their first success. And it spurred more characters. Iron Man, Hulks, and surprising to everyone, a high schooler with spider powers. Marvel sells 50 million comics annually. And sure, nothing compared to what's happening at DC, the House of Superman, but it's starting to eat into their market share. So DC, a bureaucratic corporation by the era standards, calls a meeting. How do we beat Marvel? They ask. And as is often the case when a company tries to regain some market share, it starts with a bit of, if you can't beat them, copy them. So DC is looking at Marvel's front covers. And they're like, maybe we replicate them. Maybe they've got like speech bubbles on their front covers. Maybe we do that. And Marvel, though, they're a little bit more agile. They can think on their feet. There's only a few blokes in the team. They're like, oh, well, if they're going to start using red in their comic books, we're going to use less red. And DC reacts, and then it keeps on bouncing around. And at one point, there's a DC executive who thought they're losing market share because readers wanted to buy a DC comic, but they kept accidentally picking up Marvel comics, which on one hand is a horrible way to think about your consumers, but DC has an idea. So they're like, you know what we're going to do? We'll put a big old checkerboard on our comics, and that way the customers will come in and they'll know they're picking up a DC comic. But it had the opposite effect, because it actually made DC Comics stand out, and then consumers were buying more Marvel comics, again, adversely impacting the DC bottom line. If I were to comment on it, DC was escapism, set in fantastical worlds like Metropolis or with heroic archetypes, where Marvel added the fantastic to reality, even going as far to take place in real-life places like New York, Chicago, LA. I'm going to take a beat. I want to talk about fan engagement. We've spoken about it before, Em. It's around building community. It's the best way to build a business, is to build a community around your products. In the Marvel Comics, there was an editorial page called the Bullpen Bulletins in the comics at the time. It was a way for the editor, Stan Lee, to speak directly to the comic book fans, almost conversationally. So he uses this column to stir up a rivalry between Marvel and DC, and the fans love this. And with rivalry comes loyalty. Marvel was an underdog in this space, and they could almost do no wrong. So, when a Batman TV series came into the airwaves in 1996, comic book publishers experienced a boom in comic book sales. Sure, Stan Lee, he maybe got a little bit in over his head, and the editorial tiptoed into blatant bitterness. Think Coca-Cola and Pepsi, if Coca-Cola and Pepsi were just at each other's throat. At one point, Stan was referring to other comic book makers as brand which then spawned a parody of comics that took the mickey out of comic books. Stan's behaviour, it eventually alienated longtime collaborator and plotter Jack Kirby, and he defected to DC because he wanted more credit under the ever-growing ego of Stan Lee. Despite this, things were actually never better at Marvel, and in 1968, Goodman, the original owner, he sells Marvel, the parent company, to Perfect Film and Chemical Corp, which then changed its name to Cadence Industries. And although there was a slowdown in comic book land in about 1972, Marvel finally eclipses DC in terms of sales. So Marvel is no longer the underdog. Now, there's a story of deals with DC and Marvel increasing their price of the comics from 15 cents to 25 cents. And some may cry, anti-competition, but it's the 1970s and we're talking comic books, so who really cares? The government didn't. But then Marvel backed out of the deal, and they returned their price to 20 cents. It made DC end up looking really greedy because they left their comic books at the 30 cents and where Marvel was all cheap and they couldn't go back. It's not great. Sales continued to flop around, and Marvel, now called Marvel Comics Group, tried other media, such as a radio series, a Spider-Man concept album, and in 1975, Kirby returned to Marvel. And from there, Marvel went through various stages of relevance. It enjoys excellent success, but also significant mismanagement, odd business decisions, and they're building this IP, these characters, they're releasing stories. But they realize something. Comic books, as a standalone product, are only sold when there's interest, and they are in the zeitgeist, which we talked about before around the Batman concept. And there's multiple moves to get them under their audience's nose, such as Saturday morning cartoons and trading card tie-ins. And here's where things start to get dicey. They get bought up in 1989 by a holding company for about $82 million. The hope was they were buying like a mini Disney with all that sweet IP. They get taken public and they start acquiring companies. And we've seen it before. The only thing investors want to see with a public company is growth. If you're not growing, then the investors start to get worried.
Yeah.
And so they're like, oh, we need to acquire sticker makers, other trading card companies. Let's keep growing. Bought a Major League Baseball trading card, which was a big thing. Unfortunately, sales and profits aren't booming. In 1994, the comic book bubble burst and the Major League Baseball strike meant that it completely destroyed the trading card arm, which means money isn't coming in the door. And in 1995, the first annual loss to Marvel is reported. Simply put, big company, shrinking audience, not good. In 1996, Marvel files for bankruptcy, and Toy Biz, a company that's previously tried to save Marvel or help them out, steps in and they buy it from the banks. Marvel was delisted from a stock exchange, and by 1998, the company was merged under Marvel Enterprises. It's a shell of what it used to be. But, much like Tony Stark, who was kidnapped by terrorists and forced to work in mines on the experimental tech that will one day change the world in the MCU, this is just the beginning of something fascinating. Because you see, in the year of bankruptcy, Marvel Studios launched a way for Marvel to license key characters to movie studios to make movies. Marvel Studios would do a little pre-production, thinking with like the script development, the casting, hiring directors, and they would provide that movie as a tiny little package to a studio partner for filming and distribution. Blade was the first movie that came out. It's a movie about a vampire killer, starring Wesley Snipes.
Oh, yeah.
It's a modest success. And they're like, oh, we're on something here. So they do X-Men, famously starring Hugh Jackman and a few others.
And Patrick Stewart, Dale, come on. That is the main
Patrick
one.
Stewart.
How
Hugh
dare you not
Jackman.
mention the legend?
Sir Patrick Stewart? Is he a sir? No, I don't think he can be. I'm thinking of Ian McKellen. Sir Ian McKellen.
McKellen, yeah.
Yeah.
But he's later. Isn't he? No,
No,
he's in that too.
He's in it. He's
Yeah,
wearing his
in
hat.
the early days. Yeah.
I watched it in research for this episode.
Good job. Yeah, they're like the dynamic duo. I adore them.
Correct. And it was a win by any definition. $300 million in that era, pretty good. But the licensed products, That's where the real money was. Spider-Man, it's a really good example. Marvel Studios is reported to have only made about $62 million from the 2 successful movies. Everyone will be aware, or people may be aware, Spider-Man 2 is a great critical and financial success. But the consumer product licensing fees, think about the Spider-Man lunchboxes, the toys, the wrapping paper, gift cards. Marvel was back, baby, and they had the Hollywood bug, an approachable medium with mass appeal. So they kept on licensing. They licensed their most popular IP. Universal had the Hulk. Sony had Spider-Man. And New Line Cinema currently has Iron Man. Licensing works, it stabilizes the company. But how do you grow? The leadership team at Marvel plans to self-finance the movies and other content in-house. They're sick of relying on the studios. So they get a loan and they collateralize 10 key characters from Marvel's vaults. The stakes are high. If they're unsuccessful, the banks could own Ant-Man, the Avengers, Black Panther, Captain America, and a few more.
That is a real risk.
There's concerns over launching movies with like these subpar characters. Still, the vision is clear. So, Jon Favreau, a family movie director by any definition at the time, is tapped on the shoulder, and Kevin Feige, a passionate executive who's been reading scripts in that Marvel Studios basement for a while, he gets promoted to president of production. And Iron Man is a success. It scores 3 times its budget. It was a giant gamble, not only on the character Iron Man, because, who really cares about a robot billionaire? And it's often described as a B-league character, but also they took a gamble on the actor Robert Downey Jr., and anyone who's been alive the last 2 decades know how that gamble turns out brilliantly.
But it was a gamble at the time. I remember thinking, because it was sort of Robert Downey Jr.'s comeback, because he'd had a serious
Criminal
battle
charges,
with addiction.
Addiction. Things weren't good. This movie is known to pick him out of the gutter a little bit.
But that's why he's so brilliant in it as well. Like that, he's just got that, chip on his shoulder like Iron Man does. It's great.
And Jon Favreau, like when he picked Robert Downey or for that character, that was what he said. He said, we need someone who understands the dark side of what Iron Man is.
Yeah, brilliant.
But Iron Man is only a small part of it, because the real magic is what happens at the end of the Iron Man movie. So the Marvel Studios team, led by Kevin Feige, has an idea. Our comic book readers absolutely love big crossover comic books, as you said. So what if all of our movies were incredible standalone stories, but also intrinsically linked, and it built to a big team-up event? People love it. Sequels to Iron Man. There's new franchises like Thor, Captain America. They hired a team of writers to drum up excitement for lesser-known characters. Like they changed the company name to Marvel Entertainment. But what about the comics? The stories from which it all started? Well, it actually became a really good research and development lab for Marvel. They could test storylines, characters, and more relatively cheaply by pushing out a comic, testing reception, and seeing what it may look like in another medium. Whether that's a video game, a movie, a TV show, or whatever. The movies kept coming. In 2009, House of Mouse, Walt Disney buys Marvel Entertainment for $4 billion. Disney acquires almost all the distribution rights, promotes Kevin Feige, and has him report directly to the Walt Disney Studios chairman rather than into the Marvel Entertainment CEO. Marvel and Disney strike while the iron's hot and punch out movie after movie. It works really well. The initial 22 films from Marvel, titled the Marvel Cinematic Universe Infinity Saga, grossed $17 billion with an average Rotten Tomatoes score of 84%. Success. And if you're looking for comparisons, let's take a look at DC, who tried something similar, and they were neck and neck for so long. Their attempt at a similar cinematic universe had an average Rotten Tomatoes score of about 65% and grossed just over $7 billion.
But where did Chris Nolan's film fit into that? Because I feel
not related.
Yeah, that's because that, I think, for me, ruined Batman, because now I just don't really want to see any other version. Moving
into movie commentary podcast now, but what Nolan brought in was kind of set the standard for the grounded in reality superhero.
Yeah.
And dark, gritty reboot was a phrase thrown around for a long time. And although Marvel, the way they approached it wasn't dark and gritty, it was very much grounded in reality rather than completely fantastical. Now, from this episode alone, Em, we know how these things roll. There's interest in hot topic items, and it ebbs and it flows. Marvel and DC saw it constantly over the past X amount of years. People can't get enough of superheroes, and obscure characters like Ant-Man or Thanos are suddenly household names. But you're only as good as your most recent hit. And since 2020, the hits coming out of Marvel land have yet to be as well received, both in audience
numbers. Except for Spider-Man. Spider-Man is so good.
Spider-Man could be considered part of the original 22, except for the most successful one. But what it is...
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like that last Spider-Man, that's one of the best films in my opinion.
Which is probably the peak of what people are calling superhero fatigue. That's what they're calling it. Oh, another superhero movie. Sheesh, haven't I seen the last one yet? So what's wrong at the comic book headquarters? Is this the end of the road for our spandex characters? Yeah, Spider-Man. Mentioned it a few times. Sony owns the rights to Spider-Man as an IP. So before we go on to the break, I want to talk about this because it's pretty interesting. With owning the Spider-Man IP, Sony also owns a bunch of villains and storylines, and still does to this day at the time of recording. Many people would know that Spider-Man eventually appears in a whole bunch of Marvel-produced movies, which were not distributed or made by Sony. And the only way that this was possible was through some really particular deals, which is why we have so many bloody Spider-Man films and spin-offs, because what they need to do is release a movie, otherwise the rights go back to Marvel. So they have to do something with it.
Right. I did not know that.
But Em, you've mentioned Spider-Man multiple times here, which suggests it would be one of your favourite characters. It is a favourite character for a lot of people. I know my wife prefers Spider-Man.
People in space, the space people.
Guardians?
Guardians of the Galaxy, they're my favourites. But
Okay.
Spider-Man would be a close second.
Spider-Man's one of my favourites as well.
Yeah.
So Sony holds the cards in that space. So why the hell would they allow another studio to take their IP? They have the cards, wherever they may be. So why didn't Sony just do their own thing and make their own Spider-Man universe? Which we'll touch on after the break, because I have the answer.
Oh.
It's our comic book return sound. So Spidey, that's where we left you. Why didn't Sony just keep it all to themselves and tell Marvel to shove off? And I think this is the magic of the MCU, of which Spider-Man is a part of. The sum of all its parts is far better than any individual. There's minimal chance that 3 Spider-Man movies released over 5 years would have done as good as they did, grossing just under $1 billion, if they weren't surrounded by giant blockbuster adventure movies that added to the Spider-Man story and the character development.
And having Iron Man in the first film sort of set everything up and like allow Spidey to have all of Iron Man's gadgets and things like that was such a cool like crossover, and it's so
people
exciting.
love to see that. And I'm not saying this as a super fan. I'm saying this because I read an excellent Harvard Business Review article that analysed the 22 films and found what made them tick. Yes, that's right, Em. Your mates at Harvard are a bunch of comic book nerds, or at least the ones who did this study.
Me shocked.
They found the magic of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the MCU, and it boiled down to 4 pillars. Select for the inexperienced. So the first thing in making the Marvel Cinematic Universe amazing, of the 15 directors who were part of the MCU, only one actually had previous superhero experience. The rest came from an incredibly diverse background, which brought really fresh perspectives and new takes to each movie. Taika Waititi brings some bombastic, crazy humour. Kenneth Branagh brings a Shakespearean tone. James Gunn brings 1980s music and space opera to it, each adding to the overarching tone of the universe. The next pillar, maintain a stable core. So data suggests that on average, 25% of the core group overlapped from movie to movie. This creates continuity and consistency throughout the universe. And it's an exciting way to build an organization. Then I thought about it, hang on, that's the way I usually approach a project or a task. I bring the people who have had success from project to project so that we can continue doing something that works. But the product, let's talk about that. This is one I love. The Marvel films have often been accused of formulaic and samey, but a meta-analysis of the scripts and the visual style of each movie reveals anything but. Sure, each film delivers superheroes, villains, a whole bunch of CGI, usually a giant black hole in the space that's like sucking things in. There's usually one of those. But each movie showed wild variances in tone. Iron Man 2 is described as a roaring comedy or on balance, whilst Thor is a melodramatic dark tale about a disappointed father. To add to the dataset, critics and audience members better receive those that drift further from the expected tone and visual style. Fans are flocking to the cinema to see their favourite characters in new, different and exciting environments and stories.
But also, just because you love one Marvel style doesn't mean you're going to love another. Like, my partner's favourite is Captain America. I snooze through all of those films. Like, he's my least favourite, but my partner loves him. Like, loves that sort of historical, dark. I just think he's a bit piney, but that's just me. Whereas I love the Guardians of the Galaxy and that humor and he is a beautiful man. But yeah, I'm like really into Guardians of the Galaxy, that humor, the relationship, the comedy, like that's totally all about me. So there's like so much that they're providing. So there's something in it for everyone always.
Correct, which goes back to the family entertainment. There is something in it for everyone. But the best thing that the Marvel Cinematic Universe does and the way that they kept people interested for 22 movies, cultivate customer curiosity, which for me ties back to the fan engagement days of the old. And it's done on one hand with good old-fashioned press. There's fan appearances at Comic-Cons and social media engagement. There's a famous story about Mark Ruffalo accidentally streaming the first 10 minutes of Endgame from his pocket while he was in the premiere. But the product, in this scenario, the movie, holds something, Easter eggs, and mostly in the form of these post-credit scenes, which, sure, some may describe it as an ad for the next movie, but it gives something a little bit of a fan to go, oh, wow, this is building something different. Marvel systematically builds anticipation for the next movie or some deep reference to comic book lore, rewarding those who are engaged and enticing those to find out. Dedicated comic book fans enjoy numerous little overt references to other movies within the Marvel Universe. They not only reference comic books, they also reference other pop culture. So Guardians of the Galaxy draws from Raiders of the Lost Ark and Star Wars, and Black Panther nods to James Bond. Numerous blogs and sites dive deeper into these connections and inspire further commentary. From its cultural allusions to specific references like Back to the Future, it's like all these little things that people start to look at and go, ooh, I wonder if they're doing this over here. And there's lots of socio-political themes, which Black Panther is really famous for, and it provides really rich material for fan engagement. But, as I mentioned, before the break, things have not been going well in Marvel land. There's a correlation between the CEO of Disney being fired and the architect of the original Marvel Disney deal being asked back to lead the charge. So Bob Chapek got asked to schmozzle over, and they brought Bobby Iger back. What's gone wrong? What do they need to do? And has anything else resonated with you?
I think when we talk about when company starts to lose their way and they're starting to alienate their audiences or starting to flounder, or there's some new things that are coming in that they didn't anticipate, is we're actually talking about a quality drop. It's not something that all of a sudden the audiences don't like the product anymore. You know, it's not like we've gone on to something new. It's actually that we've dropped in quality in what we're producing. The main thing would be to go back and look at what are we good at? What do audiences love about us? And I think like there are some parallels you can draw with Pixar, I think, in this. Back in the day, when you knew that there was a new Pixar film coming out, you knew that film was going to be exceptional. And they had like film after film after film was just brilliant. And they had a really good model for producing it. They had a really good way of telling stories that really resonated with people. And they still do, but they started to produce a little bit more films. And then so we started to get into quantity rather than quality. And that even more is, I think, becoming the issue for the Marvel space. If you delved into their history so far, rivalries can be both detrimental and they can also kind of spruce up competition, as you said, and free publicity.
To quote Joker and Batman comics quite often, there's a sympathetic or a relationship that's needed. Rivalries only work if the other one isn't just completely useless.
Exactly. And there's a really delicate balance, though, of that rivalry, which I think that Marvel did well, looking to the competition and not being ignorant of what the competition is doing, but then also understanding fundamentally what their strengths are and what they're doing. And what you have here is Marvel has at the moment the gross share of the superhero fandom, and they're in competition with themselves because the DC movies are just not it. Like, they're just not it. And it's like Batman, one of my favorite.
Financially.
Yeah, exactly. They're just not rising to the challenge. And so Marvel's going unchallenged. People, I guess, are getting tired and they're releasing more films a year than they ever were. And what we're also starting to lose, I think, is the distinct identity of Marvel because it's starting to get muddied. Like that film about all the gods was just so random that it did not fit into the identity of Marvel at all. And so it's like, yes, we want to, because then also another complaint is that the samey complaint, but it's like, but we have to be Marvel still, and we have to know what it is our audiences are coming to for us, which is like a bit of nostalgia, bit of fun, adventure, overcoming adversity, super strength, but with critical flaws. Another thing that I think was interesting about that you said was pricing choices, like back with the comics, DC being more expensive and not being able to come backwards, and Marvel being cheaper. What we're looking at is, so they're almost like out competing themselves because we've got the movie release of the Marvel films, and then also that is available on Disney Plus straight away. You could pay a little fee, or you just wait like a month and then you get it in your Disney subscription. So like, we're probably not tracking to the box office, especially as we're losing interest because there's so many movies a year now. I don't want to pay $30 to go to the movies to see it when I can just wait and get it like a month later and watch it at home, especially if I don't know whether it's going to be good anymore. They're sort of taking audiences away from themselves by releasing so many films and not doing what it is that they always say that they're going to do. But what they've always been really good at is creating community engagement and creating chatter. Or even in the first 20 Avengers films, who's your favorite Avenger? And like, what's your favorite film? And what did we think of Taika Waititi's take on Thor? Oh, I hated that. Thor's supposed to be this. Oh, well, I thought it was hilarious. So all this kind of like, they were taking risks all the time, and they were creating chatter commentary. Commentary and all this sort of stuff. There's nothing to comment about anymore because the movies are just fine. Like there's nothing really to say, well, that was terrible, because they're not terrible. They're just fine. I think probably She-Hulk was probably one of the best ones that sort of did some distinct chatter because it was so targeted to an adult female audience that all the adult male audiences hated it. And all the adult female audiences were upset. Like that was one of my favorite things ever, but it was such a flop.
Very well done.
I loved it so much. Yeah. I cried because I was like, oh my God, I'm in a freaking Marvel film. I'm loving this. A woman in her 30s who's single and like, I was like, this is so cool. Like, and dealing with dating and like all this sort of stuff. I loved it. Male audiences hated it. They thought it was the biggest flop ever. But that was interesting. Good chatter. Like, great. Let's do some of that there is maybe a risk of flop. But then also their audiences are heavily adult male. So then that's alienating their audiences. But I don't condemn them for that decision. But yeah, I just think it's really interesting. And now we've got the TV series and all this kind of stuff. And we're getting content fatigue. So my partner talks about this all the time. He's like, I'm sick of them. I'm fatigued. So, he's like, and now we're also that interlinking thing that they did that was so successful.
It's backfired.
But the key thing that you mentioned was that they were standalone films. We're kind of getting to a point now where if you haven't watched the entire thing, you don't know what's going on. So then you just don't watch them.
To go back to the Harvard Business Review article, it's where their two pillars probably backfired. So the first one, sure, create customer intrigue. But you ended up creating such a high barrier for entry that you couldn't just drop in at any point of the story or the product because you had to catch up on 22 films and 15 TV series and then go, okay, what's going on? I think I know what's happening. But by the time you get there, you're just so exhausted. And so that kind of thing, they lost sight of what that was and they went too hard on the crossover events. So this thing that was special was no longer special. It was just part and parcel. I think it's really interesting you call out the Eternals as a movie because in theory that should work. The Harvard Business Review nerds said it should because it's about bringing a director who has had a Oscar success for a documentary film to a story about superhero. Chloe Zhao. So she'd done Nomadland and won an Oscar for a film the year beforehand. And so in theory, why wouldn't that work? You've got the similar, you've got a loose tie. So you've got some Easter eggs to the rest of the Marvel Universe. it is semi-standalone. You're trying to create a new bunch of a team up, but you got this director who's going to bring this artsy documentary style view to it. It didn't work. And so I think it's worth considering.
It wasn't a Marvel film. I didn't mind it.
It wasn't a Marvel film.
I didn't mind it, but it wasn't a Marvel film, and I didn't get any of the things that I've come to expect and love from Marvel, which is literally business 101. Be what your customers expect from you. So I think, we're losing our way a little bit in that. But I'm not pretending like this is easy, because they've got to have a business model. They've got to produce content. They've got to have income. They're also trying to walk the line of not being old, but also being exactly what we expect. It is very, very difficult, but it's also way more difficult if you're producing this much content. You're never going to be able to nail it, ever.
Which is why I have the solution. And it's not really my solution. It's the solution that they're going with. They've said, all right, we get it. We maybe went a bit hard, a bit fast. We maybe released too many movies, too many TV shows. So we're going to scale back a lot less TV shows. We're going to do a lot less movies. And in fact, those TV shows, you can drop in at any time. They're going to be linked, they're going to reference, but they're not going to be core to it. So any TV show that comes from us on Disney Plus in future, like, watch it if you want. It's going to be great content. It's us. We're the house of mouse. We're good. But you don't need it to enjoy the rest. So we're going to reduce the barrier. Also, we've scaled it back. We're focusing on the core characters. We're focusing on the one that's going to be good. We hear you. You want X-Men, you want Fantastic Four. We'll bring those to you, but soon. We're going to do it carefully. We're going to do it slowly, and we're going to do it the right way.
Good.
And it might work. The next movie to come out, Deadpool vs. Wolverine, which for all intents and purposes should hit all the markers that's needed. It should have enough from the trailers that we've seen. It will have all the Easter eggs, should have all the characters. It should have 25% of the core cast. So in theory, it should work. Proof will be in the pudding.
I'm hoping. But this is the thing. They are in a position where they have customers who want so badly for them to succeed.
Correct.
Because they love this IP. Everyone loves it. I don't know anyone who's watched them that doesn't love it. So it's like they have so many people rooting for them that they just have to. But then with that comes pressure, though, too.
I don't think they love them. I think they're passionate about them, and so that's why when they don't do well, they get grumpy. Wolverine and Deadpool is on track, estimated to at least hit the $1 billion mark. So it should be okay. But the proof will be in the pudding. Wish you luck, Marvel.
Oh, I have my fingers crossed because I love Deadpool and I love Hugh Jackman. He is our sweet baby angel.
Love you, Hugh.
Well, listeners, there you have it. You now understand a little bit more of the con, and we hope that you don't piss off 1 billion nerds in your business ventures in the future. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the Big Con podcast. It not only supports us, but it means you'll get all the latest episodes straight to your device. Do not keep all the fun to yourself either. Share the con around your mother, your aunt, your best friend, brother. Tell them to check us out on all of their favorite podcast apps. For any further details, head over to our website, thebigconsultingagency.com, and sign up to the mailing list. Bye for now.
We see you, nerds. Go buy tickets to Wolverine and Deadpool.
Also, Rich coming from me, biggest nerd ever.